Well, good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Water Center at Penn's Alumni Weekend event. I'm Howard Neukrug. I'm the director of the Water Center at Penn. I'm a graduate of the university, Civil and Urban Engineering, 1978. And I saw these initials PAR 18. I didn't know what that was. Then I figured it out that I'm a parent of a graduate from the class of 2018. Very proud of that. We are delighted to have fellow alumnus John Freedman from Wharton, class of 1991, with us tonight. John is the senior vice president, Global Government Affairs, SUEZ Water Technologies and Solutions. Tonight, John will talk to us about the path to a sustainable water future, technology, policy, and philanthropy. Before we start, I want to remind you that this event is being recorded and will be posted on our website and social media for anyone who is not able to listen to the program today. For those of you who may not be familiar with the Water Center, we are engaged in finding practical solutions to the challenges facing our urban water systems, the watersheds that support them, and the communities that rely on them. Our work focuses on the resilience and the sustainability of our nation's natural and anthropogenic water systems with a lens towards equity, science, inclusion, and social and environmental justice. We offer a series of programs, research opportunities, courses, and publications in our effort to mentor and train the next generation of global water leaders. We welcome anyone interested in urban water issues to learn, grow, and collaborate with us via our website, through social media, or email, all of them listed here on the slide. Specifically, we encourage any Penn alum with a personal or professional interest in water to join our new Penn Alumni Water Forum. This forum hosts learning, networking, and mentoring events for Penn alumni from across the globe. Please sign up via our website under the Alumni tab. If you would like to make a donation to support our work, you can do so anytime via the donate link on our website. Moving on to our program, after John's presentation, the remainder of the program will be a discussion with Q&A. We really want to hear your questions. Please send them to us via the Q&A icon on your screen, not in the chat box, but in the Q&A icon. It's at the bottom right. We will get to as many questions as we can. We aim to wrap up around 6:15, although we have some ability to continue to almost 6:30. So let me begin by introducing John Freedman. As I noted earlier, John is Senior Vice President in charge of Global Government Affairs for SUEZ Water Technologies and Solutions. SUEZ is the third largest water business globally, based on 2020 revenues of $5.8 billion and operations in more than 100 countries. Previously, John led global government affairs and partnerships for GE Water. While at GE, John also led the creation of GE's global environmental sustainability initiative called Eco-Imagination, and helped GE create an international water business by leading in the acquisition of a New York Stock Exchange listed water company. John has served on the advisory board of the Wharton School's Institute for Global Environmental Leadership, representing SUEZ from 2012 to 2020. Sorry about that. He currently serves on the board of directors of the Water Reuse Association, the International Desalination Association, and very prestigiously, the EPA's Financial Advisory Board. John has authored numerous articles and frequently speaks on water issues globally. He has a bachelor's degree from the University of Virginia and a law degree from William and Mary and an MBA in finance from Wharton. He currently teaches a course in the Master of Environmental Studies program at Penn on what else but global water. I now turn it over to you, John.
Thank you very much, Howard. I love that picture of you and me from London that I see on the screen. So thanks for including that. Also, I just want to say what an incredible job you and Meg Kramer and Andrea and Crystal and everyone else at Penn have done in starting this water center. So congratulations for that. And also as an alumnus, it's just an honor to be here today. So thank you.
Thank you.
Let me share my screen, Howard. And just say that I'm going to talk about some of the global water challenges that we're facing, but I'm really going to focus on the solution. In other words, what is the path to a sustainable water future? And before I do that, I just want to start. Well, I'll try to start. Yes, by talking about what my own path was from Wharton into water. And unlike you, Howard, I know that you came out of Wharton as an engineer. You kind of envisioned a career in the water industry. You became the commissioner of the city of Philadelphia's water system, which is a very prestigious job. I never once thought about going into the global water business. In fact, my first job out of Penn was working for a national real estate developer in Honolulu. And then my second job was working for another national real estate developer in New Jersey, where I was vice president and general counsel. But this real estate developer was owned by a giant French water company, SUEZ. And so SUEZ wanted me to learn the core water business. And they sent me to Los Angeles to open an office to try to grow their business in the Western US. And I spent a couple of years in that tower on the left part of the screen in Century City. And then after a couple of years, I moved to Paris to work in a strategy role in SUEZ headquarters. And I was working in Paris when I joined GE to lead acquisitions, M&A, in the water space. GE had a big power business, but wanted to add a water business because they thought they were very synergistic. So I really did three things at GE. I led the acquisition of a New York Stock Exchange listed company. You mentioned that. I led the creation of GE's global environmental sustainability initiative called Eco-Imagination. And I also then became the global government affairs leader for GE's water business. And then in addition to that, added GE nuclear energy. Then 3 years ago, SUEZ bought GE's water business, so I went back to SUEZ. And Howard, I'm just going to add a couple comments. You did a good job of overviewing SUEZ, but SUEZ is actually 20 billion in revenues. It has 90,000 employees in 120 countries. And on the water side of things, we operate 3,400 drinking water and wastewater treatment plants in 70 countries, serving about 150 million people. That's my one job. My other job, as you mentioned, is teaching the Future of Water class at the University of Pennsylvania. This fall will be my 9th year doing that. This picture is not from this past fall because that was by Zoom, but it's from the year before that. I love teaching that class. And I always start the class with a chart that I'm about to show you next. And this chart was released by the World Bank 10 years ago. Howard, I don't know if you were at that meeting, but it was in McKinsey, the consulting firm, the World Bank, and others came together and they released a bunch of data about global water scarcity. And they said, hey, look, in 2010, the world reached a tipping point where the demand for fresh water exceeded supply. And they said, and if we don't take action, and that's what we're going to talk about today, the action that we can take, that this gap between supply and demand will grow about 40% over the next 15 years. Here's another way of looking at the same data. This is a map created by the World Resources Institute, a leading environmental think tank based in DC, that shows that some 2 billion people in 40 countries live in areas that are chronically short of water. And I want you to focus on two areas. First, take a look at India. Look how deep red India is. By the way, on this chart, the legend is dark red is extreme water scarcity, orange is medium scarcity, and yellow is low scarcity. I also want you to look at Southern California and see how it gets so red there. Remember these pictures because we're going to come back to them in a minute. So that kind of frames up the global water scarcity challenge. We're going to talk what's happening more in the US in a minute too. But I want to just recap by playing this short video, and it would also tee up some of the solutions that we're going to talk about. Okay, so let me show you some of the technologies that we've come up with to address water challenges. And before I do, I just want you to recall one of the factoids in that video, which said that in the US, we use about 151 gallons of water per person per day. I'm going to come back to that later. All right, so SUEZ has the technology to treat virtually any type of water, whether it's for a business or city, for any purpose whatsoever. But when it comes to addressing water scarcity, there are really three main things we can do. First, we have digital solutions. In other words, sensors and software that we can use to make sure that communities are able and businesses are able to treat and distribute water as efficiently as possible. And if you look here in the US, a typical city, and Howard, I actually maybe jump in later and tell me your experience in Philadelphia, but a typical city can lose up to 30% of its water through leaks in its distribution network. So these digital technologies enable communities to actually detect leaks so they can send in crews to repair them, and even to predict where the next leaks will occur so they can repair them before they become a problem. The second thing we do is desalination, and we have one of the largest installed bases of desalination plants in the world. desalination is a great option to have if you're confronted with water scarcity and you have access to coastline or brackish groundwater. The problem with desalination is that it is energy intensive and expensive. So that leaves water reuse. In other words, taking wastewater and instead of discharging it untreated or partially treated into rivers or oceans, we treat it to such a high degree that it can be reused for things like growing crops, which in the developing world is about 70% of all water usage, or running power plants, which here in the US and other highly developed countries is about 40% of all water usage, or even directly filling drinking water reservoirs, direct potable reuse. And one of the really attractive things about water reuse is that it costs on average half to a quarter as much as desalination. We also have all of the technology we need to recover really more than 99% of water from pretty much any source of wastewater. In effect, you're stripping out the H2O molecule and leaving the stuff behind that you don't want. And these technologies are not just theoretical. They're being used in many places in the world. Now, remember earlier, I said, take a look at Southern California. In Orange County, so maybe an hour south of Los Angeles, the Orange County Water District is taking 100 million gallons of wastewater per day, and instead of discharging it into the Pacific Ocean, it's running it through the membranes like you see in the top center of the screen, and then taking the water, the treated water, and injecting it back into the ground, which makes it a source of drinking water. So it's going to drinking water aquifers. They're also using it for irrigation, and they're using it to run industrial plants nearby. If you go just north of Orange County, back to Los Angeles, Mayor Garcetti announced a year and a half ago that Los Angeles is going to recycle 100% of its wastewater in the next 15 years. So they already have a head start because there's a plant right in LA called West Basin Municipal Water District, and they're recycling 40 million gallons of their wastewater per day already. SUEZ operates that plant, by the way, so we can talk about that if you have questions later. But here's the thing. Even though we have increasing scarcity in many parts of the world, largely driven, by the way, by climate change, which is making a lot of places hotter and drier, and even though we have all of this technology, the world is only reusing 2% of its treated wastewater today. So why is that? Howard, I'd ask you, but you're on mute. We ask our customers, and they say pretty much uniformly, well, it's cheaper to take water from the ground or from a river or even a potable municipal system where water is almost universally underpriced than it is to buy and implement these reuse technologies. And so there's really an opportunity for governments to step in. And so now we've talked about technology, now we're going to talk about policy and create policies that will promote greater water reuse. And that's why we released this report highlighting 150 examples of policies that governments around the world have put in place to promote greater water reuse. And by the way, Singapore is a world leader in reuse. Israel is a world leader in reuse. Spain reuses a tremendous amount of water. It can be done, but you need the right policies. And all of those 150 policies I mentioned all fall into one of these four categories. There are really only four things governments can do at a high level. One is education and outreach. In other words, they can explain to people it's not only important to reuse water where we're confronted with scarcity, but it is completely safe to do so. Second is remove barriers. You know, there are a number of municipalities that give volume discounts. So in other words, the more water you use, the lower price you pay for a unit of water, that perversely encourages more consumption, even in times of water scarcity. Third thing you can do is provide incentives, low-cost loans or grants from governments. Israel did that in a big way. And Israel is now reusing about 90+% of its wastewater. And finally, regulations or mandates. You can simply tell communities or tell businesses that they must reuse their water. Okay, I mentioned India earlier and said, take a look at India. India has 600 million people today that don't have access to adequate water supplies. If you've been reading the newspaper, you've seen that Chennai, India, is frequently running out of water. They are drawing on their groundwater, then the groundwater runs out, and they have to truck in water, and then it rains, and the groundwater fills up again, and then they use the groundwater, and they're in this kind of vicious cycle. A lot of India's groundwater is depleted. But in India, by the way, and we released a white paper, and my last international trip before COVID was to Delhi, where we met with 3 Indian ministers, including the Minister of Jal Shakti, which is their water ministry. They're only reusing 37%, they're only treating 37% of their wastewater today. So they have this huge opportunity, and they know it, to treat more of their wastewater. And when they build these wastewater treatment plants, to build them in a way so the water can be reused for communities to grow crops and run businesses, and even for drinking water. All right, so here in the US, the government has recently stepped up and been taking some major steps to promote greater reuse. By the way, in the US today, I think figures I see say we're reusing between 6 to 8% of our wastewater. So we're ahead of that 2% global average, but far below countries like Israel and Singapore. So last year, the US government released the National Water Reuse Action Plan. Here, 5 agencies, including the EPA, banded together to say they're going to work with the NGO and private sector community to promote greater reuse. They came up with 41 action items, which, by the way, fall into those 4 categories that we covered earlier. And one of the action items is to create a national water reuse award. So that's something that I've been working on recently. We can talk about that if it's of interest. I'm trying to do that with the White House. Speaking of the White House, the new Biden administration is incredibly focused on climate change. I just had a call at 2 to 3 today with a White House climate change official. And what I was asking about is, how does water factor into your plans? And the answer is, look, climate change is driving lots of water scarcity. We need to get ahead of the curve by reusing more water, not just here in the US, but globally. And they're talking about having kind of a White House meeting to focus on that. The Biden administration is also tightening regulations. And I'm not going to go through everything on this chart, but if you want to talk during Q&A about what the Biden administration is doing, I'm very happy to do that at a detailed level. One of the things the Biden administration did that we've all read about in the newspaper is release an infrastructure plan. And the infrastructure plan calls for $110 billion for water over 8 years. Right now, that plan is exactly what it sounds like. It's a bunch of paper with words on it. It won't become law until Congress enacts elements of it. Congress is working on that right now. My expectation is that Congress will pass an infrastructure plan sometime in July or August. And that plan will include a lot of money to rebuild our nation's water and wastewater infrastructure. And Howard can tell you about the crumbling state of our water and wastewater infrastructure, but also there'll be a significant amount of money for water recycling and reuse. Also, we can talk about PFAS if that's of interest, which is a huge issue, these forever chemicals that have contaminated our groundwater, and what the government is planning on doing about that. Moving beyond the US so now we've talked a little bit about technology and a little bit about policy. I want to talk about philanthropy and development agencies. And there's no greater organization out there than the World Bank when it comes to helping the world address water challenges. Right now, if you took a snapshot of the World Bank in the bottom right corner, that's a map with the dots showing water projects. They have 475 water projects around the world, totaling just under $30 billion of investment. I'm the SUEZ representative to the World Bank, so I work quite closely with them. And if you have questions about the World Bank, I'd love to talk to you about that as well. And then here's an initiative that I love. This also involves a World Bank affiliate called 2030 Water Resources Group, but also the World Economic Forum and the World Business Council for Sustainable Development. And the concept here is to create a 50-liter home, a water efficient home, a home that has an aspirational target of using 50 liters per person per day. Now, when you watch the video, it talked about the average person in the US using 151 gallons of water per person per day. A gallon, of course, is roughly 4 liters. So think about what a reduction in water this is. And the idea is to pilot this concept in 4 places around the world, in Beijing, somewhere in India, in Mexico City, and here in the US, in Los Angeles. Fast Company, I think it was last week, just named this 50-liter home coalition one of the world-changing ideas of 2021. Happy to talk about this if of interest. And it's not just up to development agencies to address global water issues. There's a lot of room for philanthropies to engage. We've worked, SUEZ, I've worked with every philanthropy on this page except for water.org. Water.org, by the way, is Matt Damon's water philanthropy. But the Safe Water Network is a tremendous organization. We had an advisory call this morning. That was founded by Paul Newman's son-in-law. Their concept there is to create sustainable water businesses in villages in India and Ghana right now, but they want to expand that. Water Boys was formed by Chris Long, the former Philadelphia Eagle football player, who 2 years ago at the Super Bowl was given the Walter Payton Man of the Year Award for his charitable efforts. SUEZ hosted a lunch for him in Washington, D.C. That's my wife and my son, Alec. Alec, by the way, formed the first ever Water Boys Club at his high school, and he's heading off to college next year, and he's planning on starting a new Water Boys Club at Vanderbilt, the first in a college. See if he does that. But the point is, there are lots of philanthropies doing absolutely great things around the world, and it'd be great if you can find a way to support them. And then there's more that we can all do corporately as well. And here, Howard mentioned, and I mentioned as well, that I led the creation of GE's Global Sustainability Initiative called Eco-Imagination. And my takeaway from this as it relates to water is we set a water goal, a goal of reducing our global freshwater consumption. By the way, GE was operating in, I think it was 160 countries, by 25% over 5 years. After 3 years, GE had already reduced its global water consumption by 45%, and it was still going. And none of this would have happened had the company not taken the time to think about creating a water sustainability goal. So these things really work. And I just want to conclude by playing this 30-second video from Eco-Imagination.
consumed over 3 billion gallons of fresh water from the sea each year. Water desalination from GE.
See, Howard, I have my own Howard John picture.
That's great. Thank you so much, John. That was really great. And I guess we're ready to take some questions. And I'll start with some of the questions that are in the Q&A are kind of hard. So I'm going to start off with I'll start off with an easy one, and just I've been teaching at Penn for 12 years. Including quite a number of years as the water commissioner. And I know why I did it, but I've always wondered, like, you've been teaching for 9 years, what's your motivation for teaching? Why are you teaching at Penn? And, and what are you getting out of it? And what are the students like? And, I'm sure a bunch of the alumni would like to just get an understanding of what's going on with water education at Penn today.
Well, thank you for asking, Howard. I do it for one reason. It's fun. And that's the only reason. The money is close to zero. That's not a driver. And it's very time intensive, which is really challenging. The year before COVID hit, I spent more than 200 nights in hotels. So it was really hard to do with my travel schedule, globally, and but I love it, and I love it because of the students. They're really smart and engaging, and so generally speaking committed to the environment. And then the other thing, Howard, is I just really love coming back to the campus. I love coming back to Philadelphia and to Penn, and I've been asked to teach this class at a couple other. Well, I did teach it for a while at another school, business school. And I just quit. It wasn't fun. And I've been asked to teach it somewhere else, and I'm just not interested in doing that. So it's both the students and it's also being at Penn.
That's great. That's great. Yes. And for me to say, why am I doing it? I'm not really sure, but it's so rewarding. And, probably like you, preparing for a class is hard. It's really hard work. And there's anxiety associated with it and all these other things. But once you get into that class and once you start having the energy of the students, it's just a wonderful experience. And I know at the end of every class why I did it. So I guess it's similar.
And it's a lot more fun in person than by Zoom, isn't it?
Yes. I look forward to the fall when I understand we will be back on campus. And I'm really excited about that. So another question for you is about this 50 liters, because it's so grabbing. It's such a great idea. And I think about it, and I think about the average shower by an American today uses 20 gallons of water, which is like 75 liters. How are you going to fix the shower part of this whole thing? How do you?
Howard, my high school son uses 20 gallons of water in the first 30 minutes of a shower. The next hour, I don't even know what he uses. I mean, first of all, it's an aspirational target.
Right.
And the name comes from Cape Town when they were, I guess they were going to go to 50 liters per day per person, right? Because of the drought. And so the idea isn't really to ratchet people down to 50 liters per person per day, but it's to create, it's to give us an organizing theme, an organizing concept, an aspirational goal to rally around. But the real idea is to come up with a home that's both water efficient and energy efficient. Because
Right.
if in reducing water consumption you increase energy consumption, you're not helping the world. So it's to do both, and the idea is to have some kind of energy and water efficient appliances, but also to recycle water, because we don't want you to take a shower and not be able to get the soap out of your hair, right? It's got to be a pleasant place to live as well. But the idea is, if you can go to water scarce places that are struggling and build new communities with homes that are uber water efficient and energy efficient, that's a good thing.
Excellent. Yes. Okay, so now I'm going to get to some of the tougher questions, which don't come from me, but come from the audience. And the first question came from Mike Bellissimo. And he says, I live on an island off the coast of New England. We get our water from a drilled well and an aquifer. Should I be worried that in my lifetime that our water supply might be diminished or otherwise affected by climate change? And obviously that's a really tough question because, you need to know about that specific aquifer, but I, just throw it out to you to see if you have any advice for Mike.
No, I got nothing, Howard, because I don't know the place or the facts or, listen, I'm on a well in my home. I don't spend any time worrying about it, but if we had a bad drought, it'd probably be a problem. So, I don't know.
Yeah, and that brings up a really good point about how there are only so many things that can go wrong with water. You can have a drought, you can have a flood, your water treatment plant pump might die. There's just these number of things that can happen. Your well can go dry. But the problem is that while there's a finite number of things we're talking about here, the solutions are very local and so varied. So Mike, in order to answer your question, we really have to know where you live, what you're doing, and what this aquifer is like. Otherwise, there's really no way to answer this. And to add to that, it's this whole concept of what you've been talking about, John, with water use and how we're using too much water around the world. Then you have places like where I'm familiar with, Philadelphia, or Washington, D.C., or some other places where there's plenty of water. Pittsburgh is a great example. There's too much water.
Yeah.
And how do you, and this whole idea of how do you create a global policy that has local impact that is very different in California than it is in Pennsylvania.
Yeah, and I have some thoughts on that, Howard, because you're right. New York City typically is more worried about where to put water when it rains than it is about how to source its next gallon of water, right?
Right.
So totally different dynamic, totally different set of concerns. My view on policies is to create policies that communities can choose from if they need them, but not to mandate that they do things. And so, for example, if incentives exist for communities to implement water reuse plants, they're not going to build a water reuse plant if they don't need one, right? Just because there's some incentive that will defray some of the cost. But if they need to reuse water to kind of drought proof themselves or for whatever reason, then they would have that incentive to draw on.
Yeah, good. Okay, so I'm going to move to the next question. Sorry, Mike, I don't think we fully answered your question there, but love to come up to your place and and do a little personal investigation of your aquifer. But let's see. Please discuss PFAS mediation and remediation technologies and strategies. And this is a very complicated subject, and I don't know how much your work takes you into this area, but it's there's a lot of controversy over the health effects and what the maximum contaminant levels should be placed at, and states are doing different things in different places, and the problem is it's everywhere. And I know there's a number of companies out there who are looking to do treatment both in situ where the water is, and also at the point of entry into a person's home. So I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
Well, PFAS, and PFOA, there are thousands of these chemicals, forever chemicals, because they don't degrade, or they degrade it over very, very long periods of time. And so once they're in the environment, it's a problem. And they've been put in the environment largely by industry that uses it in certain manufacturing processes. but also as a firefighting foam in military, Air Force bases. And so there are two things. One is, how do you stop it at the source?
Mhm.
So, wastewater discharge regulations, that makes sense. And two, how do you clean up or remediate where it's already in the drinking water supplies? But both very doable. The technology exists to clean it up today. The technology exists to treat it before it's discharged, to start with. But it's expensive. And so what the Biden administration has done is said, we're going to provide $10 billion, which is a lot of money, over 8 years, dedicated to PFAS remediation. So that's a great start. And I know, Howard, that, like you said, right now there's no federal, MCL, they call it maximum contaminant level from EPA for PFAS, but they are going to put one out, and it'll be soon.
Yeah.
And then all 50 states will have to be at or below that level. And right now, states are in different places. Right, New York's at, I think, 10, which is maybe the lowest in the country, 10 parts per trillion, whatever. But it's an evolving area. It's an area that's kind of scary because, people don't really fully, I think, understand the health effects. It's very hard to study and understand.
I don't even understand. I know I've been talking about it in my class for several years now, and there's always a question about PFAS and PFOA and how to pronounce it, much less what it is. And for the audience, we're talking about forever chemicals that do not dissolve quickly in the environment. The classic one is PCBs that we've been dealing with in an environmental global level for 50 years. I don't know why PFAS has suddenly become the element to talk about, or where it came from, and we've certainly been around for the same length of time.
I'll say, and I'm not trying to minimize PFAS at all. Quite the opposite. I think it's almost certainly a big problem. But I want to say that one of the things that's happened, Howard, is that detection technology has improved so much that we are now finding things in water that have been there for a long time, but we didn't know it until recently. We couldn't verify it. And so we're detecting things at much lower concentrations than was ever possible before. And then that raises the question, well, at these concentrations, is it a health risk or not? It's hard to study things when there might be thousands of different contaminants in water. So it's not just what's the health impact of one of those contaminants, but what's the impact of them in concert with each other? I mean, these are very challenging things to study. EPA is working on it, but it's challenging.
Yes, and there are a lot of wrong answers, but very few correct answers out there. And
I think for people who are concerned about most water contaminants, you can use a simple activated carbon, like a Brita filter,
right,
and that'll take out most everything.
Yeah. That's my first job out of Penn was working on carbon and ozone treatment systems, and and they work. They really do work.
Yeah.
So let me see what else we have here. Thank you all for putting in so many questions. Next one deals with oil. Since oil is moved through pipelines, is it possible to move water from U.S. flood areas to areas with insufficient water?
You asking me, or you want to?
Oh, I can answer it, but you're the guest here.
You go ahead and answer it. I mean, I haven't thought too much about pipelines, except I know water's. Yeah.
I guess what I tell my students is that there are very few things that are preventing high quality water from reaching everyone in the world. And basically, it's not technology. The technology's there, but it's really issues of money, water conflict, meaning civil war, and governments that are not really are not stable enough for a company like SUEZ or some of the other companies to want or be able to financially go in and take a risk of putting in water systems. And there's a lot out there, but I don't know if you have any.
But by the way, Howard, I noticed one of the participants is named P. Cairo. So if it's Patrick Cairo, he
Oh,
probably has a good answer to this question. I don't know if people in the audience can lob in answers. I also saw the inimitable, the incredible Joanne Spigonardo, who was leading the Initiative for Global Environmental Leadership for a while, and so such a fantastic Penn
yeah.
leader.
It's and that brings up a whole other thought is like the import how Penn has not been known as a water academy, as a major researcher in university, but we are there. And if you look around the whole water business globally and nationally, certainly, Penn's graduates working in the field of water are very well renowned. And Patrick Cairo, we mentioned, he says on our list here. He hired me. He was a civil engineer graduate from Penn, and got a job at Philly Water, and came back a number of years later and brought me in to Philly Water, and has been a mentor to me for quite a while.
Patrick was a legendary SUEZ leader.
Yes. So he worked with me with Philadelphia Water. He was deputy commissioner, and worked also with you at SUEZ, and was a great leader there also. So hi, Patrick. Okay, do we answer that question? Since oil is moved through pipelines, is possible for? Okay, so well, I'll throw in a little bit more here about flood areas, and floods are interesting. They are by far one of the biggest issues of how do we acclimate to climate change and the amount of flooding that's occurring, but they are still very intermittent. And to create a pipeline to take an intermittent flood and the volume of tank that you would need to store that water, and then the pipeline you need to move it, is probably going to make that problematic as a primary solution to the problems out there. But it is possible, and a lot of work's being done with green infrastructure and other techniques to manage stormwater. Maybe not flood water, but storm water, the normal storms, to be able to reuse that water. And how much do you include when you're talking about reuse? You're talking advanced technologies and wastewater, the reuse of roof runoff or other things. Is that included in your definitions?
No, that's not. I'm talking about treated wastewater, from a municipal plant.
Okay.
But Howard, one thing I do want to say, about this question of moving water from point A to from where there's too much to where there's not enough is, that's how Southern California gets a tremendous amount of its water.
Yes.
2/3 of the state's population lives in the south, but 2/3 of the water falls in the north. And so, they actually have an aqueduct that conveys it. So it's doable, but these are not inexpensive projects. And I will also say, because the topography in California, roughly 17% of the state's electricity production goes to pumping water, which is incredibly heavy and expensive to move. So I think it's just it's achievable. I think the Romans did it, right? I think it's a question of cost, and
It's all cost. It's all cost. It's 90% technology, 10% management, and 100% cost and governance.
And then I saw one question, Howard, not to take the wheel from you, but about
please,
can we provide verification of the 2,700 gallons per hamburger? And the answer is we hired an agency to make that, and they researched and fact checked, and everything was ticked and tied, but I don't have that data. So maybe, I don't know, maybe it's on Google.
Yeah, it's you see this kind of data an awful lot. This is for the rest of the audience, this is the question about it takes 2,700 gallons to produce a hamburger. And what that's referring to is that is the amount of water that's needed to keep cattle alive and fed and watered and whatever, and the amount of water is needed for the food stock that the cow eats, and it all comes down to the size of I assume a quarter pounder, or maybe a third pounder, who knows what it is, but yeah, these numbers are, you can say, well, maybe it's 2,000 gallons, maybe it's 4,000, but the idea is really there, and it's really true that the amount of water it's needed to provide water to someone like a carnivore like myself is quite a lot. And those of us who know vegans, like my son's a vegan, and looking to reduce the amount of the impact of life that in the food that they eat on the impact on the environment is tremendous. I mean, he's looking at numbers like this and saying, I just can't do it. Can't eat a hamburger.
And I also saw a question about Israel, Howard.
Yes.
And that's something that I think you're probably.
You're not supposed to be looking at the question. I'm looking at the question.
Oh, you are? Okay. I'm sorry. Well, can I answer it since I asked it?
Go ahead, go for it.
Israel is really interesting to me because, I mentioned they're reusing 90% plus of their wastewater. They set a goal of reusing 100% of their wastewater. What they found is that the benefit of reusing that next marginal gallon of wastewater is outweighed by the cost. In other words, all the easy stuff you can do, they did, and then it starts to get uber expensive to treat the really tough stuff or get it to the point where it's needed. Or so they're probably 90% is probably not a bad place for them to end up. But the government made it a national priority to reuse its wastewater, and they funded all kinds of projects and done. And it's actually way more complicated than that, but very, very much from a top down kind of perspective. And then in terms of Red Sea, Dead Sea, the Dead Sea is very depleted. Jordan needs more water. There's a multi-billion-dollar project that's been in the works forever called the Red Sea Dead Sea project that would desalinate water in the Red Sea and pipe it to the Dead Sea, and then the saline reject water from the desalination process would go into the Dead Sea, but the fresh water would go on to Jordan. And that project, I don't know, it's in fits and starts. So we've been shortlisted. SUEZ has been shortlisted as one of 5 bidders to work on it, but I think it's stalled right now.
Okay. Well, and in the water business, there are a couple of city states that are considered well advanced of the others, and that includes, and you said it, Singapore and Israel, and some of the Arab states. Saudi Arabia is like doing incredible things with desal. It reminds me of when I work with Peter Ng, who's the CEO of Singapore Public Utility Board, or whatever it is, PUB, and I asked him, I looked at him and said, how are you so innovative? Why are you so innovative? And he looked at me and said, Howard, if you had no water, you'd be innovative too. And and you look around the world, and very much so, California, Australia, Singapore, Israel, the Gulf states.
Necessity is the mother of all invention.
Yeah, and the invention is there. I mean, it exists. And is it going to get? And I guess the question for you is, well, I assume that the technology is going to just get better and better, and cheaper and cheaper.
Yeah, and Howard, what the real play on the technologies, you're absolutely right. The cost is coming down, but the real play is the energy efficiency is increasing tremendously.
Yeah,
and it's actually going beyond energy efficient to energy positive.
Great.
So it turns out that the wastewater has a lot of organic material in it. You can convert the organic material to energy.
Mm-hmm.
So there's actually at least 4 times the amount of energy you need to run a wastewater treatment process.
Right.
In the wastewater itself. That's where we're doing that. We're beginning to build these energy neutral or even energy positive wastewater treatment / reuse plants.
Yeah, it's and the whole industry is changing. we used to call them sewage treatment plants, STPs. That was in the, I guess, until the 60s or 70s. Then we started calling them publicly owned treatment works. We thought that sounded a little bit better, and then we moved to water pollution control facilities. But now we're talking about R2E2, which is resource recovery and energy efficiency facilities. So you're taking a wastewater plant and you're saying there's nothing here that's waste. It's all reusable. It's all, everything that's coming. And the bottom line, the last piece of reusing everything that comes into a wastewater plant is reusing the water, which is very much where you are. Speaking from the public utility side, we're very much into the methane, the carbon, taking all the carbon, converting it to methane, using the methane for cogeneration to produce both energy and thermal heat. And it just 10 years ago, it was an effort to get 50 to 60% of the energy needed to run a plant from the wastewater plant itself. But now you're seeing more and more facilities around the world hitting, getting to be energy independent and energy neutral, and it's quite interesting. And the next challenge, of course, is the greenhouse gases and becoming greenhouse gas neutral. And the industry is really moving in that direction. And thanks to SUEZ and other companies, the work that you guys are doing, it's things are changing. Things are getting better. Hate to say that to everyone who's been watching MSNBC or Fox News, but things are getting better in the water business. Okay. Let me go to the next question here.
Yeah, I'm not going to look at the questions anymore.
Okay. I have no idea where you're. Okay. Cyber attack, which is not, I don't know if that's either yours or mine area particularly, but how secure are the U.S. water reuse, treatment, distribution, and groundwater systems? If insecure, what can be done and how can it be prioritized?
So Howard, I'll just start, but then I'm going to turn over to you because, I'm curious what the story was in Philadelphia. But SUEZ in the U.S. operates drinking water utilities and wastewater utilities that serve 7.5 million people. So obviously, the security of those systems is an area of acute concern, right? And something we have teams who work on cybersecurity. And I'd say, we have a lot of, systems in place, but it's an area of ongoing concern that, everyone needs to continue to be on high alert. And you saw what happened in Florida, right? Not that long ago.
Yes. Yeah. It's impossible to really know what's going to happen and where next. And the water industry, just as in terms of response here, is there's a lot of activity going on, and there's lots of efforts to isolate the computers used in operating, maintaining, monitoring your systems to keep them absolutely clean separate from anything outside. But still, problems still, of course, occur every now and then. And so it's a tough one. And is it absolutely secure? I couldn't say that it is at this point. But there are, you look at the oil industry and you look at a pipeline like this and you say that that was not secure enough to avoid this kind of situation. How could you take that for any other industry and say you're safe? We think we're safe. We're doing everything we can, but you never know what's next. Okay, so I think I'm up to the next one, and I might need some help here, Meg. But how can companies be held accountable for water? Oh, okay. So this 50 liter thing, which is so obviously something that is very exciting to a lot of people, and It's a great concept and initiative, but why residential? Why not the corporate industrial world? And counting on them to reduce the amount of water that the ag world. Yeah,
That's a really good question. I never thought of that. I mean, I don't know that you can apply a 50-liter standard or pick any one standard for industry. I mean, it's so varied. But I would say that on the industrial side, and I won't speak for every company in the world, but so many companies over the past 10, 15 years have embraced water sustainability and have set corporate water goals. And we just saw a huge company. It's one of the largest privately held companies in the world. It's very much in the agricultural sector. I'm trying to blank the name, but I think they have 200,000 employees. They just announced their water goals in July. So it's just happening increasingly, and companies are even coming out with tighter water goals. It's pretty common now. So I would say that companies are, in general, acutely aware of how they are perceived, and are largely taking measures to use water prudently.
I'll admit that in the 1990s for the Journal American Water Works Association, I did a one-pager on the future of water. And one of the things I predicted was the waterless shower. So to answer the question before about how do you get to the 50 liters in a resident, but then, really smart people looked at me and said, Howard, what do you mean by a waterless shower? And I said, I have no idea, but if we can get there, that'll really help you get to the 50 liters. So, sorry. So are there any water reuse projects underway in Philadelphia?
I defer to you, Howard.
There's a lot. I mean, we're really looking at this, and it really comes to cost benefit of these projects. Again, Philadelphia, like much of the mid-Atlantic states, are water rich, and we plan to stay that way. And so there's a different whole cost benefit how you look at this, but we're looking at things like the wastewater is at 60 degrees Fahrenheit, typically year round. So how do you use the thermal energy in the wastewater to do things? And we have one plant that's down by the airport. How do we use thermal energy that's sitting in the water and use it to heat and cool the airport, and provide incredible savings there. Philadelphia, the opportunity to create free or close to free water for industry and bring industry in, that's not happening today, but it's certainly something that's out there into the future. So there's a lot of opportunities, but the economics in the US have not, or in Philadelphia, have not been there really to make too much really happen yet. What technology and or policy has been especially impactful in Africa? The entire continent has the same scarcity level of India. Are you familiar with what's going on in Africa?
Yeah, I mean, in Africa, I mean, everywhere there's more than just one problem. It's not just scarcity; it's quality issues, Howard. A lot of times the water source is contaminated with fecal matter or other things. They need wells to be drilled. They're deeper wells, safer wells. It's often a pretty simple solution, but one that a poor community might not have the money to implement.
Right.
A lot of the charities, I showed these philanthropies on a chart. Water Boys is initially focused on Tanzania, Safe Water Network was focused on Ghana. The World Bank has a slew of projects throughout Africa. I just think it's a question of, money and effort. I mean, it's a totally solvable problem.
Great. Yeah, it's all money. It's all money and government and, politics. It's,
Yeah.
And for the private industry to come in and solve a problem, somebody has to pay them, right? You have these incredible companies that are out there like SUEZ, who can provide the technology and et cetera to do these things, but it's your business.
Yeah.
And I say that in
Right.
a
I mean,
very positive way.
I didn't really mention it, and not looking to pat Suez in the back, but Suez has a corporate foundation that contributes money to, address issues like this. We funded this year a ton of projects around the world through the Red Cross or Red Crescent, depending on where it's located, through Water for People, through World Serve and Assist International, which was on the chart I showed. I didn't talk about them, but we donated money and also equipment, Howard, ultrafiltration drinking water equipment, that'll purify water, to go in a slum in Kenya. There's an area called Kibera, which is they think between 500,000 and 700,000 people live there. And during COVID, they didn't have adequate supplies of fresh water. They couldn't wash their hands. We put in clean water stations, but it's the proverbial drop in the bucket. It's hard to address everything. So you need World Bank and you need the UN and you need people to kind of find a way to work together and drive home needed change.
Yeah, there was a saying that water is the new oil, and I agree with that to the extent that there's a lot of money needed. It's all solvable. It's all there, and and I said before, technology will get better, and things will become less expensive. But today we know how to do this. We know how to send people to the moon and have them recycle their water and be able to survive. And so it can be done, but it's just money and politics.
Yeah, I think it's just starting with the will.
Yeah. So here's another question for you. How have you seen, and this is quite related, the growing global water stresses impact the geopolitical climate? Would there be a case where we see water security, accessibility, safety, et cetera, become a national concern? And I'll just to get you thinking about it, I'll throw out, well, that's why Singapore is being so innovative. They were getting all their water from Malaysia, and they felt insecure about that and started this campaign to become water independent.
Yeah, I can't answer the question, Art, because I've never, focused on it. I mean, most of my job is working for a corporation, so it's not something we've looked at deeply. But I know this. I know the World Resources Institute does studies on that and have issued reports. I know that at one point, I don't know if it's still there, the CIA had a document that it had publicly available about water conflict. The State Department looks at water conflict. USAID, which is a development agency, they tried to invest in water projects in areas where they think there's a strategic US interest, and they want to kind of tamp down the prospect of potential conflict. So it's something that people who know what they're doing could talk about. And I think it's a real thing that's out there. I just don't know any details.
So one last question that comes from me, and that's the yuck factor. It's what do you do about the idea that people don't like the idea that they're drinking wastewater? How do you overcome that?
Well, that's truly a PR issue, Howard, in my view. And like whoever invented the term toilet to tap, I think they could have done better. But I'm going to tell you this. I believe in my core that the treatment technologies and the monitoring technologies make treated wastewater safe for anything, including drinking out of a glass.
Yeah.
And I have spoken to tons of people about this, and one government official I spoke to in Australia, and I won't tell you where it was, but he said, we studied this issue, we conducted focus groups, and ultimately, John, I found the thing that worked best was simply not telling people at all, because it's perfectly safe and they don't need to know where it comes from. So I don't know, that's an option, I
Well,
guess.
and those of you and alumni who've been drinking water in Philadelphia when you were in school here, at least, get our water from the Schuylkill River, and that water is kind of recycled. I mean, there's a lot of wastewater plants upstream of Philadelphia, and the water is reused by the time it comes to our facilities. But it is clean, it is safe. But once people start becoming aware of these issues, that yuck factor does come in. But as I said, I mean, so technology is pretty incredible thing, and we're tackling it very well with companies like SUEZ and the work that John's been doing for decades now, making the water safe to drink. So thank you, John, for participating in our program today, and to all the alumni who submitted these difficult questions for our discussion. It's been a great dialogue, and I really personally enjoyed this. And John, John and I can go back and forth on this stuff for hours, and I hope you enjoyed it also. Program has been recorded and is available from the Water Center's website starting tomorrow. So you can send it to those of you who have friends who missed this and may want to hear about this. You will be receiving a feedback survey via email, and please take a few minutes to fill it out so that we can improve future programming. And if you have any suggestions for topics or speakers you would like to hear from, please let us know via that same survey. And just a very special thank you to you, John, for joining us tonight. And as you had mentioned, and I did not mention, the people in the back room here, Meg Kramer and Andrea Gary and Crystal Pleasant. Thank you, Chris. You guys put in a lot of work to make this a successful program. So
Howard, it's always so fun to hang out with you, and thank you for including me. Sincerely appreciate it. And
this is not, I'm going to get you again. I'm enjoying this.
It's great to spend time with my Penn family. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Good night, everybody.